That's the thing is you just get in there, try to run hot. You know, if you run poorly, you're like, well, obviously I spend all of my time coaching.
If you're basing your play on showdowns that you saw this week, probably a bad sign. You probably messed up somewhere, right?
Trying to evaluate how good your opponent is in game, it's just a waste of your time and energy.
The vast majority of the time, if you think you have a good exploit, you take that exploit and don't worry about anything else.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Seeking Balance podcast. This week we have Patrick Howard. Patrick is the founder and head coach over at Mobius Poker, a stable of elite cash game players who crush many of the high stakes online. He has done extensive amounts of database research and is a brilliant strategic poker player. We dive all into the kinds of strategies that his database research reveals, and there's a lot of great tips here for poker players of all skill levels. I really enjoyed talking with Patrick. He is someone who we've had on my former podcast, and it was great to talk to him again. I hope you guys enjoy this, and now I bring you Patrick Howard. Patrick, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this, man.
Thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Yeah, round two. Well, you were on the OG podcast, so I guess this is round one for this one. But yeah, I had a podcast a few years ago that died out. But yeah, thanks for doing this again.
Gotcha.
You have a better background this time.
Yeah, I've watched your podcast a lot. I think it's probably the main podcast that I've been listening to recently, poker related. So yeah, I really like it.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That's a huge compliment. I appreciate it. Yeah, hopefully we're gonna keep growing it and keep doing more stuff with it. But yeah, you're here to contribute your own little piece to it, so I appreciate it. Yeah, we were talking before. You've been I haven't heard from you a lot lately. Like we talked, we did that podcast. I think I saw you around Vegas at the GTO Wizard party, and then haven't seen much online and stuff. What have you been up to?
Just working on my research and my programs. I've been doing a little bit of content stuff. I definitely made a choice to move away from Twitter a bit and then focus more on YouTube and Spotify and doing videos and podcasts. However, I always end up getting drawn back to research and creating poker programs. And I like creating content, but it's not my favorite thing to do in the world. So I definitely could be more diligent about posting on socials and stuff, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird balance because it's like me, like my passion is definitely mostly just, well, talking to people like you. So like, that's why it's easy. But then, working with people. But then, if you want to be able to do that professionally, content creation is this kind of necessary thing that has to be. I mean, I guess you could always find somebody to do it for you, but in my experience, I've had to find some way of creating content.
It seems hard to do. I've always been a one-man show, like my business. Basically everything that I do is just me. And, any video that I put out, like I'll edit it myself and everything. I don't know. There's probably a better, more efficient approach, but I don't know. It just seems hard. Poker's very niche. Like it's hard to just get somebody who understands your vision for what you're putting out.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult. You either, in my experience, you either sacrifice on, like you said, like the poker knowledge or like the insightful knowledge, or you sacrifice on the video editing expertise. You have to, it's hard to find someone who's a very good video editor with deep knowledge on poker. There's not very many of those. They do exist, but there's not that many.
I do have some cool videos planned coming out soon though for YouTube. So, and I've been doing like a new podcast where I interview poker players while doing a database review for them. It's called Stat Check Sunday. I've done a couple of them and took a little bit of a break, but I'm going to be posting even more of those. So
that's sick. I was doing research for this and that didn't even come up. I didn't see it. Where is it on Spotify?
It's on YouTube. I haven't been.
Oh, it's on YouTube.
Spotify.
Oh, okay. That's sick. That's a great idea. So you're doing a database review with the player. Are they well-known players?
Nope, just anyone who subscribes or who wants to submit an application to be on can join.
Oh, nice.
They're not like my students. They're not necessarily well-known players. And I actually anonymize everybody so that I'm not giving away their usernames or their stats. But I like it because everyone's different. Everybody has a different problem to focus on. One of the guys that I did, he had a problem with, he just should be moving up and he's not. He's crushing his games and something's holding him back from moving up. Another guy, it was a totally different issue where I felt that he was projecting too much on what his opponents what he thought his opponents were doing and like taking pretty extreme exploits in some cases. Um, so yeah, everyone's different, and I like the format because it just kind of makes it fresh each time.
Man, that sounds like just so unbelievably valuable. I mean, you've been a coach for a long time now. So yeah, I mean, you can even hear it in the way you describe these problems. But yeah, how I have so many questions about this because I didn't know you're doing this. Dude, I would do this. What's the how many hands would I need to get for you to do a database review for me?
Um, I think you could probably make do with 25,000, but I would like to see a minimum of 50.
50. That
Yeah.
that maybe if you keep doing it, maybe like 6 months from now, if I just like chip away at 50K hands or something, because that sounds fun. What format would be? I probably have 50K MTT hands over the last like year or something, but you're probably doing mostly cash, right?
Well, I do have an MTT stat checker too now. So we could do that. It's not my expertise is definitely in cash games. So, um, but we can definitely look at MTTs too. Like a lot of the same leaks transfer over, especially of course when you're looking at post flop, it's a lot of the same stuff.
Right. Yeah, I think it's this would be interesting to look at because I probably have some pretty hard exploit lines I'm attempting to take, and I think it'd be interesting to talk about uh because I play MTTs almost. I've over the last couple of years, I played them almost exclusively on ACR, and granted I watch my own stats reasonably well too, but it'd be cool to compare it with the stat checker and see two things I'd be curious about. One, if where I think I'm exploiting it, if I'm actually doing it as hard as I would like to be doing, if that makes sense, like, or maybe I could be more aggressive. And then if spots where I'm doing it where it might just be bad, where like I might have a read on something that might just be incorrect, but I don't know if the stat checker would help so much with the second category.
No, it would help with both. So I see both things happen often. Like, for example, somebody will tell me that they're over bluffing a lot, and then we look at their actual bluffing frequency over 50,000 hands, and it's balanced, or maybe it's over bluffed or under bluffed by a few percent. Like, it's nothing compared to what they thought it was. And then as far as the pool stuff, I see that too. I see that even more frequently, actually, because you can use the same GTO stat checker and run it on your pool. You can run it on regs, you can run it on fish. And a lot of times people will say, my pool is not overfolding, or my pool is over bluffing against me. And then we look at the stats and it's just not true. So that's why I like the stat checkers, because it can ground you in reality, and you don't have to rely on your memory or your experience of what's happening over the course of months, because that's obviously really unreliable.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that is itself a skill. I don't know if you feel the same way, but your ability to like have a sense of like if what you're doing will actually show up in the stats. I think you can get better at that. I have felt that, but I think part of the reason why I have felt that is I do whenever I'm playing consistently, I do consistent reviews on my database. So like I have a specific stat I'm looking to watch change, and over months I will keep checking it, and that I think has built even if you don't show me. But what's interesting is I'm sure it has trickle down effects in other stats that I'm not tracking as well, if that makes sense. And then I'm sure there's also. But yeah, do you see that? Do you feel like you're someone who looks at databases all the time? Like, do you feel like I could put you in something over like 6 months and you could have a more accurate sense of how your stats are moving, or if they're doing the things that you think they are?
Um, yes, I mean, that's kind of what my coaching for my program Mobius Cash does, is we get an initial stat check of like your last year of play, and then we do one every month for like a year after that. So every month I'm giving the students a specific thing to work on. Like, this is your main league. This is what we're going to work on this month. And then as long as it can converge, which usually can, students are playing like 30,000 hands a month usually. Um, we'll check that every month and make sure that they're actually plugging that leak. And for some people, obviously it's harder than others. It depends on your baseline too. Like, if you're just a passive three better, um, and you just really don't like three betting, you might make a conscious attempt to three bet more and your attempt ends up bringing you from like 9 to 10%, and you're still under three betting. So some people with some things, it's harder than others.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's hard in my experience with trying to like have to balance the in-game like live adjustments to this particular hand and balancing the view of this spot as something that will be represented in the aggregate as a stat. Um, because like I want to be able to make an adjustment based on the nuances of this particular spot, right? Like this particular turn, this particular opponent, this particular timing, like all of the subtleties, like a more global picture of what's happening, but also not getting so lost in that. I do that I am still aware that, you know, making too many adjustments will just like cause a stat. I don't know if I'm describing this well, but cause a stat to be just like totally out of whack, and grounding myself in both simultaneously. I guess I'll just put that to you. Do you kind of get the tension I'm describing here? And like, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's a tension between what you think your stats should be and what your actual, you've got a lot of different things factoring into whatever your decision is in the moment. And I guess what I would say is don't focus too much on what your stat should be. Like the idea that you should be like three betting 11%, that's not the kind of thing that I would want cluttering a student's thought process while they're playing. It's just not really like a actionable goal really in the moment. But the way that it would show up in ideally in your thought process, I think, is I point out that you have these leaks and I show you what your tendencies are. And then as you're playing, you might get to a spot that you feel is close. And hopefully at that point, if it's relevant, you will come back to, oh, I know that from my stat checker, I tend to make mistakes in this direction. Like I tend to not three bet enough. So if I feel like this is a close hand, maybe if I feel like it's a 25% three bet, well, maybe I should three bet at 50% because I know that I have this tendency to be too passive in this spot. So that's how you actually take your stats and you use them in the moment. I think generally anything that is like some far off, like vague goal, a long-term goal is probably not going to help you when you're actually playing poker in the moment.
Yeah, agreed. I think I'm curious this too because when I typically when I'm looking at stats and the way it works into my thought process, the thought you just pointed out is really useful, which is to know like, okay, well, I know I'm typically like, and there's weird connections. Like, let's say I know I'm typically under barreling turns on flop, thinking about like, am I, betting enough hands or checking the right hands to like be doing this with or like whatever. But there's also for me the biggest part of my thought process is more how actively am I tuning into what I view are the mistakes of the pool and the players, which we kind of mentioned. And I've actually found that to have a greater impact on my shifting my stats than even my own concern about my own strategy. Like if I'm particularly dialed in well to the spots where people are doing things poorly, this may not be true for everybody because, like you described, some people might be too careful or too cautious. But typically, if I'm like, oh, this is just like a good spot to run a bluff, and as long as I mean, some spots you don't have to be concerned with anything else other than that. That's it, and you just run every bluff. And I don't think that's every spot, but that is some spots.
I think most of the time that's right.
Yeah, yeah. Most of that you just run every bluff, or
Yeah, I mean, I would say the vast majority of the time, if you think you have a good exploit, you take that exploit and don't worry about
right.
anything else.
Yeah. I guess there's a question to the environment and the people you're playing against and your own. Yeah, this would be. I put this to you because I I'm more in your camp, but I also feel like if you were to watch me play, I think people would think that that makes my game look more unhinged than it would if you were to watch me play. Whereas on average, I'm in that camp generally, but I probably have some moderation and some restraint in spots where I'm like, I think this spot's overfolded, but I'm not quite sure, and I'm gonna lean this way. Um, but to be clear, we're coming from very different backgrounds. I spend very little time actually looking at like mass data. That's not a thing I do. I'm mostly focused on like what I think the data would show based on tendencies of players and stuff like that. But do you find that you ever do you have any approach to moderation depending on the pool? Like if you're playing against the same kind of regs all the time, like do you have any kind of moderate approach to running exploits or?
Yeah, and honestly, like I don't really spend much time looking at mass data these days either. Like with the stat checker, you don't really need it most of the time. Like you can just look at your pool stats, and if you're playing decent volume, you're going to have 500,000 to a million hands on your pool, and that's obviously much more valuable to have than like some other database because it's your pool, it's the players that you're playing against. I think as far as going with exploits, it just depends on how good your opponents are. Um, so I think the only time that you would not want to go for an exploit is if you think you're up against a really strong perceptive opponent, and you could burn that exploit. Um, Another more subtle thing that can happen is let's say you're up against a really good player who likes to cause chaos. Some players are really good at um, uh, just pushing like the aggression subtly in every spot. And so you might be up against like a very elite player who just check raises too much on the flop. And you could say, okay, I know how to exploit the player who's check raising too much on the flop. I'm going to do that. But now you try to counter that, and now you're off from the flop. You've deviated from your core strategy. And some of these players are so good at doing this that's actually their goal, is that they just want to get you off, yeah, just out of your comfort zone, in no man's land, and they're just going to outplay you on the turn and river. So like, yeah, I think you want to be conservative based on how good and perceptive your opponent is that you're playing against. Obviously, if you're just up against a recreational and you have an exploit, there's like no reason to ever pass it up. But if you're up against an elite player, that's where you might have to be a bit more careful and just fall back to theory more often.
Do you bring in any moderation though to your own confidence of said exploit? Because you obviously could look at any line and have an idea of what's like, because I guess there's two kinds of exploits, right? There's exploits that we've sort of built a strategy around, strategized around based on the data we've seen in our pool, based on like basically like before showing up in the game, strategies we've built, right? But then there's exploits that are like, okay, this river I think is a particularly this this river is more likely to be overfolded than most rivers, I think. And maybe in this line, this wouldn't be that overfolded a spot, but I think this river shifts things. And do you approach, but in that spot, I could just be wrong. My opponent could read that as a river where they might overfold and the result could cause them to overcall, or, there's all kinds of ways that this might go. Do you approach exploits like this with moderation where do you allow for any kind of uncertainty strategically where you're like, okay, well, I'm not quite sure, so I'm not always going to hard exploit every spot where I think someone might be doing something wrong, independent of their skill level.
Yeah, it's I think that your understanding of theory is how you hedge this. Like ideally, if you understand the theory of the spot, you're not going to be making any big pure strategy errors. Like if you have a hand that is just a bluff, in theory, you bluff it. If you have a hand that's a very poor bluff, in theory, you check it. But then you have a lot of hands in your range that are close. And those are the types of hands that you have the liberty to um, go with your exploits more. And so, like, this is what I like about poker is the exploits and the theory really bleed together in this way. And as you get better with theory, you'll get better with exploits because you just know better when you're free to take them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a really good point because I think this is like a spot, knowing spots where there are, the thing that actually stands out is not the hands that are, for we're talking about bluffing, not the hands that are checks and so you check them. It's actually knowing the hands that are just like, you should never check this. Also, like, that's a thing that's interesting, where it's like you are making a very big deviation to not bluff this hand because you have four high, or or like whatever. And I see this always shocks me when working with people. On average, is not, it depends on the pool and the person. Obviously, some people are always betting the ones that are clear checks too, but on average, I see people shutting down bluffs that are just like, there's no reason to introduce some discretion here with this hand. Like, this hand should just be going for it.
Yeah,
um
some hands can be really, really profitable to bluff in theory. Like very plus EV to bluff. Um, and yeah, like as you get better at theory, it's basically like you just have better context for your exploits. That's kind of how I think about technical skill, is you just have much more accurate context when you're making decisions. So a much stronger theoretical player might not even entertain taking an exploit because they just understand the theory of the spot, and they understand that, oh, my hand is just an incredibly pure strategy here. So let's just not even go into that, exploit thought process.
yeah, I mean, to be fair, sometimes you'll run that bluff and you'll get called by a hand that I think can cause you to reassess that read. But like, that's usually in more out of line pools. Like, I think I think the kind of mixed strategy, and like yeah, I've talked about this with other people, but the spectrum between making decisions and making sure you are sometimes checking and sometimes bluffing allows you to make sure in most spots you're getting more data that is not so committal in terms of a strategy, where you can like see the kinds of things people are doing. Because if like you said, like, you might, there are some hands that might just be a pure bet, um, that you go with, and then you get called by a hand that's like, oh, I probably just should not be bluffing this spot, against this guy. But the truth is too, that spot may never come up again against that person. That might be a situation you just never have. I think people have a hard time reconciling that, like that feeling of like, I ran a bluff, I got called by an absurd hand. And I think that feeling is a big part of why people avoid running bluffs.
I mean, you can get called by an absurd hand and it can still be correct to make that bluff. It doesn't actually say everything about, how often your opponent is actually calling in that spot. They might have just decided to make a really light call down in that one particular spot. This is something that people get confused about all the time when they're bluffing recreational players, because recreational players just have a lot of trash in their range, and sometimes they will call you down light, but you're not seeing the other times where they fold a big hand. You're not actually looking at their overall folding frequency, which is actually what matters for the math, the EV of the bluff in that spot. But I think it really just depends a lot on, like, for people who are listening to this, what games are you playing? Because at the lower stakes, the correct answer is often going to be to go with your exploits. The exploits are going to be bigger. But then as you go up to higher and higher stakes, I guess it just gradually, it's not to say that people play perfectly at higher stakes, but people are definitely better as you move up. So you do gradually, I think, move towards, I'm just going to try to make the correct play in theory most of the time, um, and less about just going for the best exploitative play every time.
Yeah, well, and I also think your exploits as you move up just get more sophisticated. Like, you can, there's sophisticated ways to talk about exploiting people that is just not so clear as like, oh, they're doing this thing. If you have a person who, let's say you have a person who c bets a lot, slightly too much, they don't double barrel quite enough, and they overfold river. Uh, Once you get to river probe a little too much, it can be good to like now just like overfloat flop, knowing that you're going to get to the river probe opportunity too much, run a river bluff. And so I think you just get more broad strategic exploits, that can be really good. But yeah, single spot, like, oh, I'm just going to run a lot of bluffs here as you go up. Those probably just get reduced, in terms of like, people are just like playing sophisticatedly enough where it still comes up, but like, obviously I think it's a little harder. There was something.
This is a funny little fun fact, I guess. But in a lot of pools, people overfold the river so much in that line where they see bet and they check the turn and they fold the river that you can calculate it. It's actually like break even or slightly profitable to just flat a 1/3 c bet with any two out of position because you can bluff them off so often on the river.
Many people relate to their own minds as a dangerous place. They move carefully, quietly. They know that if they move too far into unfamiliar, harsh territory, something could rise up they're not ready to face. To begin meditation is to make a different choice. It's to make the decision to be an adventurer, a warrior, to hold the aspiration that there will one day be no place in your own mind that you are too afraid to visit. This is what meditation is for. And this is what my program in 2026 is about. Click the link below to learn more. So this is I like these kinds of exploits because when I talk with a lot of players, a lot of people aren't even like thinking in these terms of like multi-street strategic exploits, which I think once you start doing that, the game just becomes a lot more interesting. Where you're thinking about like how are these frequencies kind of like aggregating together to make like for profitable plays, and in ways where it's actually not even that perceptive. Like you know, it's just like they're getting c-bet, you're getting to the river so often. Oftentimes when you get double barreled, you just fold all these trash hands. So like it doesn't even, no one's even gonna notice, you know? But yeah, it's an interesting these like multi-street exploits are pretty fascinating. But uh the the interesting thing that I'm want to bring up before we move past it is this like idea about playing recreational players and like their calling strat being like more sporadic. Well, first off, I think it's worth noting that this is even true with regs, though, because we're all people, so we're all prone to like weird biases. And I've worked with regs who have this strange bias towards not wanting to be wrong with bad hands and not wanting to be wrong with good hands. And so, like, folding good hands a little too much and calling bad ones a little too much. So, even like I've seen fairly good reggy players make this error where you could play against them and it could look like they're calling you a lot. They're like hero calling you a lot, but they're actually folding some of their better hands more than they should because they don't want to be wrong. And they're calling some of their worst hands more than they should because they don't want to be wrong, but they're still overfolding the spot globally. But one of the things that I give people the recommendation against most recreational players is just to think more macro level, because the strategy is going to be, the micro is going to have so much variation in it that you just like kind of have to ignore it, and you just have to think more macro facts, like how is the spot globally going to look to a fish, like what is this, you know, which is you're kind of getting into with the aggregate stat. But like I do see this a lot where people just stop running bluffs against fish because they get called by some wacky hands and they think like, oh, they're just never folding. But it's like you just with bad players, they're just trying to be right in this hand. You know, with fishy players, they're not thinking about their hand as the strength of it, or they're just trying to be right. You know, they're just trying to like put you on a hand and make the decision. And which is why I think if you just think macro on average, you're gonna like, does this spot look scary for them? You're just gonna get closer, and then you kind of just have to ignore all the data at showdown until you get a lot of it against this particular person.
Yeah, I think there definitely is a tiny, like, sort of a value bluff effect that comes from the fact that people are trying to exploit you when a solver never does that. So they're going to make some out of line calls, they're going to make some out of line folds from the solver's perspective. I'm not sure how big of an impact that actually has on the way you would, you know, that you would want to value bet or bluff, but it's definitely an interesting thing to think about. But yeah, I just think that like the core problem is when you are making exploits without that are not founded on any sort of data. Like they're they're based on, if you're basing your play on showdowns that you saw this week, that's it's probably a bad sign. Like you probably messed up somewhere, right? And you want to base your exploits on statistics and just like frequencies whenever possible. There are some players I think who can get away with a more intuitive approach. Like I've definitely worked with some players who just kind of feel like they have some sort of intuitive genius happening, but it is rare. Um, so I think the safer approach is to not assume you are that person and to actually make sure you can point to the reasons why you're making an exploit each time.
I mean, I think even if you are that person, there's probably a good argument to just be there's almost always still something to gain from looking at data. Like I think regardless of how genius you are, the precision with which your genius is operating could probably always be improved. And like um, obviously I think, we both know some really great and talented players and the real thing is like for some people they just don't want to and they can do good enough without it. And if that's who you are, that's fine. But I think almost everybody from a pure EV perspective could benefit from just informing all of their reads and stuff with more data. But
Yeah, I think they are basically, in my experience, always interested in looking at data too. It's just they have some weird way of compartmentalizing that data and like correctly calibrating and using their intuition too. Whereas, someone who's not as good of a poker player will just drastically overweight some data point that doesn't matter and, kill themselves doing that.
yeah, I'm curious. The MTT stat checker. Do you work much with MTT players? I know you primarily work with cash, but do you often or have you often worked with MTT players?
Not right now, but a couple of years ago, I worked with Yuri Martins for about a year very closely, and a bunch of other MTT pros who were playing very high stakes, and they were pretty much interested in, all of the post flop stuff that I had figured out in cash games, and we did a lot of work to determine if that stuff carried over to MTTs. And often we found that not only did it carry over, but the exploits were even bigger in MTTs, because I do think that because MTT players focus so much on pre-flop, oftentimes the post-flop study falls through the cracks, and they often have even bigger leaks.
Oh, I think the post flop leaks, and I was playing. Like I said, for the last few years, I played exclusively on the ACR MTT pool, and once I stopped respecting the post flop game more, of like, and I was playing like 215 $215 buy-ins and above, pretty much exclusively. But I think the beginning, my exploit, I thought I was a pretty heavy exploit cash player, but I realized playing MTTs, I needed to actually do way more exploiting. And the moment I started doing a lot more exploiting, at least my big blinds per 100 went a lot higher in the MTT pools. And this, yeah, like you said, a lot of the spots are similar. There are some differences in terms of how the spots feel to me. I wouldn't be quite sure what they actually map out in like the data, but like I did notice that I would have some sense of a spot that like I would think would be overfolded in a cash game that I think MTTs just like players in some of these more subtle spots get view them a little differently. But I will tell you what, if you're playing MTTs like ACR MTTs, people love to bluff and have no sense of what hand is an out of line bluff. like they, that's one of the main things that I saw is if you just start getting really scrupulous and really particular about the lines that you're willing to fold in, especially if they're even kind of passive lines. I mean, yeah, I've called multiple times with ace high in like the line we were just talking about, where I see bet flop check turn and then end up on river multiple times with ace high to see a worse ace high trying to bluff me in a spot that's just like it's an insane hand to choose as a bluff. Like but yeah.
Yeah, that's a line that's historically been overbluffed. Just naturally, it's very easy to overshoot that. And then I think probably also what's happening is you have some people now that, database analysis has become more well known. They're actually trying to target that line and getting intentionally out of line with it. And yeah, so the other thing is just that in MTTs, you have a smaller average bet size. And you definitely, when you study river bluffing frequencies, you find that regulars tend to over bluff with those small sizes a bit more. Like most sizes on average, if you're looking at all regs, obviously individuals have different tendencies. But if you're looking at everybody as a pool, most river bet sizes are going to be pretty balanced. But I would say the exception is like around half pot and less, and those sizes can be over bluffed depending on the pool. And then in MTTs, you're just going to see those more often. So that doesn't surprise me that they're just over bluffing on average.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy to me the lack of it's not over bluffing. Like I get out there, like I'm a guy who's going to fire lots of bluffs, right? You showed me the line that I just talked about, but it's not a line I would take like like ace nine off or something, that I floated flop with as a bluff on the river. Like to me, that's we'd have to say this particular flop, but like there are some bluffs that are just insane, regardless of what you're aware of the stats being. Like there are, and this was, I think that what you have is less refinement in the MTT space because they just don't have the time for it. And to be fair, it's not worth the dollars to be probably to be worried that much about it in MTTs. But it slowly became crazy to me the bluffs that people were running, particularly in that pool. And also the point that you mentioned, that was one of the things I noticed very quickly too, was smaller sizes seem pretty out of balance. And particularly overbets are also out of balance, but they're just people just don't overbet bluff enough in MTTs on average. That they're very precise with the hands they will overbet bluff with, as was kind of one of the things that I was noticing. By the way, I remember the thing that I was going to bring up earlier, which was you were mentioning the value bluffing dynamic with people who are like kind of call. I know anyone who has that instinct has been called by worse when bluffing, like
Yeah.
too many times, because I have had that a few times, and it always leads me to think like, man, maybe should I just be doing this more? Because like I had a guy, I was playing heads up on Club WPT Gold, and I bluffed a pair. It was like a C bet, overbet turn, overbet all in. We're like 200 blinds deep, so it was like huge overbet turn, huge overbet all in on river, and I had a pair. And guy called me with like a worse pair. I had like third pair or something, and guy called me with like a worse pair on river, and I was like, man, maybe maybe there's something here. If this is like, I don't know, but there are also spots that are just like so crazy that like it's pretty hard to plan around it.
There
But
was just a really fun hand that happened in the coin poker challenge where Linus called with 8 high, and he was right against Ryan Depaulo was streaming, and I'm sure that Ryan could have been bluffing with a stronger hand there. Like I wouldn't rule it out, but yeah, that was a really fun hand.
do you remember the hand history?
I don't remember exactly, but it was like Linus open from UTG or hijack, and then Ryan Depaulo floated cutoff or something with 3 deuce suited, and I think the 7 deuce game was on, and so Linus see that I think like a king 5 flop, and Ryan floated. I can't remember if he had just backdoors or a flush draw, and then the turn. No, sorry, Ryan raised the flop, and Linus called. I might be butchering this, but at any rate, the turn was a king. I think they might have checked the turn, and then the river was another king, so there was quads on the board.
Oh, and he called
And
with 8 high.
Linus checked, and obviously Ryan jams with his 3 deuce suited. He couldn't possibly have a worse hand there. And Linus tanks for a bit and calls with pocket 8s. So that was probably, I mean, I think that will be the hand of the challenge for sure.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. That's I can see what would cause somebody to call there though in that particular spot. Like that's if there's a spot to call with 8 high, that's the spot to do it.
Yeah,
In terms of
especially when the 7 deuce game is on.
Yeah.
And you've got a
Specifically,
guy like you've got like
a
I
very
think Ryan
aggressive
was
like
just streaming, like he was being
yeah
staked by coin poker to stream in that game. So obviously he's gonna try
yeah
to make it entertaining and splash around a bit.
yeah
But
yeah.
I actually created a leaderboard for this challenge on my site. So if you go on my homepage of my site, you can see that it's an interactive leaderboard that I update every day with the standings. And it'll probably be over by the time that this airs, but you can go back and check it out.
Yeah, it almost certainly will. I'm doing a stream with somebody shortly. Actually, I'm going to be live with somebody who's playing in it, um, and so I'm excited about it. It's a cool challenge that they run. The cash player.
So good for online poker, like especially now that GG has shut down their high stakes games. Like we really need sites to promote high stakes action in order to just keep it alive. So yeah, I'm really happy that they're doing that.
Yeah, you have. I mean, you really need some kind of poker dream, for people. I think MTTs do this a lot. But if you're starting at home and you want to start getting into poker, there has to be a real path to like potentially making a lot of money from your living room, or it's just as much less interesting. So yeah, I think it's cool that they're doing it. It's also just fun to see who wins, like it's always fun to see. I had Prodigy on the pod and it was great to talk to him about it. Yeah, it's just rare, few spots you get to see so much battling happen these days, from some of the best players.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you ever considered getting in there and playing yourself, or?
No, I wouldn't. I'm not sharp enough. Like I just spend too much time on my business and coaching. Like maybe I would play the mid stakes one, but it's
What
just
is what is the mid stakes? Like what stakes is mid stakes?
I think it's NL 500. I could be wrong about that. It might be 1K, but I'm pretty sure it's NL 500.
Surely you would do well at the NL 500 challenge, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. If I dedicated my time to it, it's never good to underestimate your opponents, but um, yeah, I think if I wanted to, I could be competitive.
I'm a quintessential underestimator of my opponents. I don't know if I would agree that it's I don't know, but I think yeah, striking that balance. But I feel like I don't know who are the big names doing the NL 500 challenge. I think Wacko does it, right? He and I talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, I know he played it, but I honestly don't know. I don't think I know a single other person because I didn't really follow the mid stakes one very much.
I'm sure you'd do fine. I think it'd be. I think you would. I would bet that if we like, let's say next year you were going to do it, I would place a bet that if you had to guess how well you would do at it, that you would do better than it. Like I think you would underestimate yourself going into it.
Um,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, it's a balance. Like obviously, if I'm playing it, I'm not gonna. It's not like I'm going to think that I don't have an edge or that I can't beat these guys. It's just I don't know. It's a weird balance. Like I always say, you want to have a healthy amount of respect for your opponents. So like don't drastically underestimate anybody, but obviously you don't want to be scared of people either, or like think that other people are just like smarter than you, or um, you want to be confident but also have respect for your opponents.
yeah, I would say you want to have maximal respect and maximal disrespect.
Yeah, it's a weird
That's what,
like
right. Yeah.
it's a weird combination of respect and disrespecting them.
Yeah, I think people too much try to end up in the middle where they like try to feel like they neither respect nor disrespect their opponents. You know what I'm saying? And I think that would be I think just to whatever you want balance, right? So to whatever degree you have respect for your opponents, you need to make sure you have the equal amount of disrespect for your opponents. Like if you're the kind of person who thinks your opponents are great, which there are some people like that, you need to be the kind of person who's capable of thinking your opponents are trash, like that your opponents are just garbage and they're missing everything. And I think as long as you balance those, then you'll be okay. But I think the problems that arise is when people have way too much disrespect and no respect. So they're just like they're trash and they have no sense at all that their opponents can be good and can exploit them. And like this is true of even recreational players. But like that, respecting recreational players' desire to win money, I think is important. And the same thing though, I know players who are just like have so much respect for their opposition and no sense of disrespect for it. But
Yeah, it's but it's so common that I see like when people are really stagnating in poker, it's so common for them to just think that all their opponents are trash. And it's really weird that they don't see it. Um, and it's not something you can really, I haven't been able to effectively get this across to people. I think it's something that it's like a blind spot that people have to see for themselves. But so Matt Marinelli is playing the challenge right now. He actually lives down the street from me, and we're always going on walks and talking poker. And he's really good at this. Like half the time, he's telling me, like everybody's like not everybody, but like these guys are trash. Like they're so lazy. Like they have these giant leaks in their game, and then the other half of the time, he's just like obviously he's not actually thinking like that all the time because he works harder than anybody that I know. And he's like, I have to beat these guys. Like I have to work harder. I have to do everything better than them. And he's like insane about his work ethic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there's something to be said for the difference between how you would self-assess and like how you would describe things and how you actually feel when in game. Like, I think the truth is if you're in game, if you're caught up thinking anything about if your opponents are good or bad or whatever, you're probably just not in a headspace that's helpful, period. Like anything that is trying to evaluate how good your opponent is in game, it's just a waste of your time and energy. So most of the discussion, because I again, if you talk with me about players, everyone who knows me knows that I think everybody's terrible. I just talk about everybody as though they suck. But this is very much like a post-hoc description, right? Like if you want, as soon as you plot me in a seat against somebody, I'm just in a hand and I'm thinking about strategy and like I'm not making a guess about like they're good or bad because you're just making decisions from ego at this point, right? Like whether they're good or bad. If you're like, oh, they're great, then you're just making decisions about this. You're creating a concrete image of a person that's just good and is just going to beat you in this spot. And the same thing is true if you're thinking about them as bad. You're just creating a concrete image of someone who's bad, and for some reason you're just like entitled to win in the spot or something. But hopefully you're just thinking strategically and you're just thinking about the facts in an impersonal way,
Yeah, I guess if I could get more specific about it, when I see people who call their opponents bad, when it becomes a problem is two things: when they're using it as an excuse to not study, or when they're using it as an excuse to make a play that is just like not good. Like they'll just say like, I think this guy's bad and he's never bluffing here, so therefore I'm going to make this ridiculously tight fold. So if it's an excuse to make bad plays, or to just not study, like basically if you're using it as an excuse to be lazy yourself, that's when it will become a problem. And when I don't see it as a problem is, these like really competitive crushers, of course they think that they're the best and that their opponents, at least some of them, are trash compared to them. But at the end of the day, they're playing at an extremely high level and they're working and studying really hard, so that's the important thing. For me personally, though, I'm a full-time coach. Like I run a poker coaching business, and almost all of my time is just researching, whether that's theory or researching data or creating software for poker players. So in that case, like I do think it would be kind of like hubris for me to jump into a nosebleeds championship with the best players in the world who only focus on playing poker and maybe like will do some coaching 10% of the time. Like that's just probably not going to work out for me because I just don't have the time and energy to focus.
Did you hear what I said?
I could just run really hot.
Yeah. That's the thing is you just get in there, try to run hot. If you run poorly, you're like, well, obviously I spend all of my time coaching. You run hot, you're like, yeah, I'm better than everybody. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I do agree with you. And what's interesting is I think no matter what, when you're talking about people's play as good or bad in the example you described, I think it is typically, again, like a post-hoc description of why you did something, And so even the people who are like, oh, this guy's trash, he's never bluffing, that's why I called. You're probably just really disconnected with why you actually called in the moment, and now you're here reflecting on it and trying to make a reason that's not as embarrassing for you to say to your coach about why you folded or whatever.
There's a really good book on this, and I haven't read it in like 5 years, so I can't do a book report for you right now, but it's called The Courage to Be Disliked.
Oh, yeah.
Have you read this?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's It's more, as far as I'm aware, it's more famous as a self-help book in Japan. Um, but I read it years ago, and it's kind of focused on Adlerian psychology, and a big theme throughout it is people basically um, describing themselves to make their actions make sense, um, and like yeah, like a post-hoc analysis of what you're doing, like you said. I think it's a really interesting read.
I think that's if there's any book, I said this to somebody recently, if there's any book that is in the top 5 books of books I most often recommend, I don't know where it would be. Courage to be Disliked is in the top 5 books of the books that when people say like, what's a book I should read? Courage to be Disliked is up there. It's a great book. Everybody should pick it up.
Yeah, I agree. I remember it just had like a huge impact on me when I read it. It was just really good.
Yeah, very, very great. Yeah. I'm not sure how much more there is to talk about. I'm like, so you just did a new version. I do actually want to ask. You just did a new version of Mobius Cash. What caused you to do a new version? Like, what needed updating?
Um, well, over the years, a lot of people who are like at the 200, 500 L level have applied to my flagship program, Mobius Cash, and it's just too big of a financial commitment. Really, like it wouldn't make sense for them playing those stakes to invest. Um, and I thought it would be, helpful for those players, and also players who just they don't feel like they need as much one-on-one coaching, and are more interested in the materials. So uh, I created a self-directed version of Mobius Cash, which we're opening up this year. It's actually already opened, and you get the same materials that you get in Mobius Cash. You just don't get the coaching sessions with Matthew Marinelli, and you get fewer coaching sessions with me, but still, unlimited Discord support access. You can chat with me. We still have a couple coaching sessions, but it's not, we're meeting every month, and, I'm giving you tasks every month. It's more like you get to study the materials on your own in a self-directed manner. So that's the new addition to Mobius Cash this year. And I'm hoping to also have some other programs launch in 2026 as well. So people can stay tuned for that, I guess.
Awesome. I asked about Mobius Cash. I'm glad we talked about it, but I totally meant to say Stat Checker.
Oh yeah, the stat checkers too. I have a new version for cash games that's been like fully updated since I released this a couple years ago.
What caused that to need updates? Because I feel like so the Stat Checker, I mean, it just like compares your stats to like theory basically, right? Did you just do more lines or better data, or what was the updates that you did?
So I added a bunch of like aggregated GTO stats to it. For the elite version of the stat checker, you can actually see GTO stats for like how often you're supposed to fold on the river in any line. We didn't launch with that initially, and just over the years, people have asked for more accuracy. Like, for example, there are certain spots on the flop, like when you are c-betting blind versus blind in a single raise pot. That depends a lot on your rake structure, like what your correct c-bet frequency is going to be. So I went through and updated everything for different rake structures. I've added a bunch of pre-flop stats for different rake structures. We have about 10 different structures now. We have anti-games in the stat checker. So I'm just like always trying to add things to it and improve that stat checker.
Yeah, I mean, the Stat Checker is a sick tool. Like, I don't play professionally anymore, but if I was playing professionally, it's definitely something I'd be using all the time. I think it's one of I don't know. Is there anything else like it out there? Like, I don't know if there's even a competitor to this, but it's just like
There's starting to be, yeah.
yeah,
Some people were
yeah.
catching along and making very similar products, but yeah, mine was the original. Been developing it for a couple years.
I will say that if something like this is going to be developed, you really want it done by somebody who has like good background and like knowledge in what it is they're doing, because I think it's hard to get the level of resolution that is in the stat checker that you have, and this is a process that really matters how you're getting it right. It's very easy to get bad data that can or just not helpful data that can look like helpful data. So you really want something you can trust. Yeah, I would totally be down. I want to look right now, actually. Oh, I can't look on this computer. I'd totally be down to do an MTT version of your podcast though, because I think I only played like once or twice a week over the last year an MTT, so I probably have like 50, 60K hands or something. Would that be enough for MTTs? Because I feel like you would need more.
No, that's enough. You can
Okay, okay.
definitely.
That'd be fun. That'd be fun to do that, to go through and do a little hand review. Uh
The new MTT stat checker has like ICM built into the preflop stats too. Everything was chip EV in the original version, which obviously is like left something to be desired. So I just ran a shitload of ICM sims over this year and updated everything. So
That's crazy. That's like, yeah, that's so much work. I mean, you are just like a researcher at heart. Like if anyone like has that is the thing that like will make the tools better than the alternatives is like I know the amount of work and like care that you'll put into these is a lot. So
yeah, I would say, over the past few years, my focus has been entirely on research. And then going forward, it's going to be a mix between research and software. So still researching poker and doing, traditional poker strategy development. But I think, I've done that for a very long time. And I want to like keep focusing on software now because there's just like the technology that's available now, basically, without like getting too deep into the weeds, it makes it a lot easier for me as a single person to develop software on my own instead of having to hire developers. And so that's kind of what my 5 to 10 year vision is like I would like for basically every major software that people use in the industry to be made by me, like whether it's a stat checker or a trainer. I just have like so many ideas for software that I want to work on over the next few years, and hopefully you'll see some of that coming out soon.
that's awesome, man. Well, it's been great catching up with you. Super glad to have you here. Tell people where they can find you and where they can learn more about all these things that you offer.
Mobiuspoker.com is my site, and you can check out my YouTube channel for free stuff like the Stat Check Sunday. Yeah,
Awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks again. We'll have to have you back.
thanks.